If Don Quixote may be called the birth of the novel's dialogic consciousness, then Gustave Flaubert's Madame Bovary marks a decisive turning point in the evolution of European literary polyphony. The threshold where the classical comic world of open laughter and carnival is transformed into an ironic, interiorized form of discourse. In this work, the forces that once collided in the market square now confront each other inside the consciousness of a single provincial woman, and within the linguistic fabric of bourgeois society itself. Flaubert's novel is the tragedy of language under the conditions of modernity. How words, discourses, and ideals, once fluid and shared, become petrified clichés that possess human beings rather than serving them. Yet even within that ossification, a polyphonic drama survives. For the world of Madame Bovary remains an arena of conflicting voices. The voices of romanticism and positivism, faith and skepticism, poetry and prose, each resonating through the consciousness of Emma, through the narrator's detached irony, and through the reader's own uneasy laughter. The essence of Flaubert's art lies not only in aesthetic perfection of form, but in his acute, historico-linguistic vision. He shows language itself as a social battlefield, the site of ideological struggle. In my understanding of the novel, polyphony is never simply a matter of multiple characters, but the mutual dialogic interference of worldviews. Flaubert's innovation was to transform the external carnival of Cervantes into the internalized carnival of discourse. In Madame Bovary, the laughter is subdued, almost frozen, suspended between pity and ridicule. Yet beneath the apparent monologue of authorial irony lies a densely populated polyphony of social languages, what I have called heteroglossia. The novel's texture is woven from the discourse of sentimental novels, the bureaucratic idiom of provincial officials, the rhetoric of medicine, the pious clichés of clerical speech, and the commercial slogans of the bourgeois marketplace. None of these is Flaubert's own voice. They are the idioms of an epoch, speaking through the mouths of its inhabitants. Flaubert does not overtly ridicule or idealize them. He allows them to sound fully, exposing their inert repetition and self-containment. This is the first stage of the modern irony that recognizes language's double life, its claim to sincerity, and its inevitable contamination by convention. Thus, Madame Bovary is not simply the story of adultery or moral decay, but a study of linguistic alienation, of how human emotion is mediated through voices already heard, phrases already written. The protagonist, Emma, is herself a creature of discourse, a consciousness constructed from quotations. Her dreams, her aspirations, her disappointments are filtered through the language of romantic novels and the sentimental rhetoric of religious confession. She does not experience passion directly. She experiences it as citation. Her love, her despair, her notions of grandeur all come prepackaged in words borrowed from books. Herein lies Flaubert's profound dialogic irony. He reveals how the self becomes inhabited by foreign words, how inner life is colonized by external speech. Emma's voice, when she speaks or thinks, alternates between inflated lyricism and banal cliché. Yet these voices carry emotional power. She believes them even as they betray her. The tragedy of Emma is not moral weakness. but linguistic captivity. She cannot distinguish between authentic speech and ventriloquism. Because, in her universe, authenticity itself has lost its ground. She is a modern Don Quixote. But her chivalric imagination has been replaced by romantic rhetoric. She tilts, not at windmills, but at language itself, attempting to live in the sign rather than the world. Flaubert's narrative practice intensifies this dialogic tension. Through the style I have described as free indirect discourse, an artistic device that dissolves the boundary between narrator and character, allowing the speech of one to infiltrate the consciousness of the other. In the space between Emma's yearning and Flaubert's detached observation arises a whispering chorus of perspectives. When the narrator reports her feelings in language colored by her own idiom, the result is ambiguity. Whose words are these? Who judges whom? The effect is neither empathy nor condemnation, but heteroglossic tension. The narrator's irony depends on his proximity to the character's speech. He cannot expose illusion without entering it. Thus, Flaubert creates a peculiar, new authorial position. Omniscient, yet speechless. Judging, yet self-erasing. The author's silence is saturated with others' voices. This is the beginning of what I call the hidden dialogism of modern narration, where authorial consciousness becomes a field of intersecting discourses, rather than a unifying authority. Flaubert's celebrated impersonality is precisely this: the refusal to impose a final word. The author arranges language to reveal its duplicity, and leaves truth suspended within the dialogue of styles. Nowhere is this more evident than in the novel's description of Yonville, that provincial microcosm of 19th-century France. Each inhabitant speaks a language appropriate to his social position. Yet each of those languages has turned stale, emptied of dialogue. The pharmacist, Hames, embodies the positivist rhetoric of progress, his speech overflowing with platitudes about reason, hygiene, civilization. Yet this rationalist idiom, intended to banish superstition, itself becomes a parody, a self-centered performance, whose verbiage overwhelms significance. Beside him stands the priest, Bournisian, whose vocabulary of salvation and sin operates on an equally automatic plane. The two converse endlessly, yet never truly communicate. Their words rebound against each other, like clichés meeting in midair. Here, Flaubert exposes the monologism of modern discourse. Each speaker, enclosed in his ghetto of terminology, immune to response. The dialogic relation, speech that anticipates the other, is replaced by solipsistic pronouncement. Language ceases to be bridge and becomes wall. In this provincial world, the social heteroglossia is immense. Yet the dialogic contact between voices is minimal. What emerges is not polyphony in harmony, but the noise of isolated idioms, a premonition of linguistic entropy. Yet precisely through this entropy, Flaubert creates the modern polyphonic novel. The carnivalesque laughter that once united opposites still glimmers here, though muted into irony. The agricultural fair scene, with its grotesque interpenetration of the romantic and the mundane, exemplifies this transformation. While the dignitaries proclaim the virtues of productivity, and the bourgeois crowd applauds, Emma listens to Rodolphe's declarations of love. Two discourses, occurring simultaneously, yet indifferent to each other. The rhetoric of public utility overlays the rhetoric of private passion. The meaningless pomp of officialdom becomes a parody of the heroic love speech. Flaubert orchestrates this simultaneity with almost musical precision, creating a structure of counterpoint. The fairground scene is thus a carnival of discourse, exposing the absurd coexistence of incompatible linguistic worlds. Here, irony becomes a form of knowledge. By juxtaposing languages without reconciling them, Flaubert reveals the fissures of social reality. The agricultural fair is not accidental farce, but a microcosm of the dialogic universe. Deprived of mutual hearing, Flaubert's treatment of eroticism similarly operates through the logic of the carnivalesque inversion. The sanctity of marital fidelity collapses into material transaction. Love letters become commercial contracts. Confessions morph into bills of debt. The erotic sphere, traditionally a locus of metaphysical aspiration, is degraded, commodified. Yet in that degradation arises a grotesque truth about the age. The high ideal meets the low reality. And through that meeting, Flaubert recovers the laughter of the people, though it is now the bitter laughter of recognition. The carnival, here, is internal and tragic. The same forces that once celebrated bodily freedom now consume the self in economic slavery. But unlike moralists who condemn, Flaubert observes from within, granting each voice, romantic, realistic, economic, its full resonance. He allows language to expose itself. This method transforms realism from mirror into dialogue. The world reflects itself through the collision of its discourses. The role of irony in this structure must not be confused with cynicism. Flaubert's irony is the mode of authorial participation in a polyphonic world. By withholding judgment, he compels the reader to oscillate between empathy and distance, between laughter and sorrow. Irony, here, is dialogic awareness, a consciousness that inhabits two linguistic planes simultaneously. The reader, hearing both Emma's allusions and the narrator's corrections, must negotiate the gap, thereby becoming a participant in the novel's internal dialogue. The ultimate unfinalizability arises from this participation. No interpretive attitude can exhaust the text. Every irony calls forth its counter-voice. One may pity Emma for her confinement, or blame her for her vanity. Both responses are true and incomplete. Flaubert's art refuses final verdict, precisely because he constructs his world as a space of converging, irreducible perspectives. Language's transformation into style in Madame Bovary exemplifies what I call the social life of the word. Every word in the novel, love, happiness, virtue, science, is worn thin by social use. Yet when placed in new relational contexts, it regains necessity. Flaubert's mastery lies in his orchestration of stylistic contrast. The florid adjectives of romantic narration, juxtaposed with the flat diction of official reports. The pseudo-biblical cadences of moral sermons, interrupted by the metallic rhythm of urban commerce. The result is not homogeneity, but orchestral dissonance. This tonal plurality is the essence of modern heteroglossia. Flaubert, whether deliberately or intuitively, anticipates the modernist awareness that reality itself is constituted by competing discourses. But unlike later experimentalists, who dissolve form entirely, Flaubert balances order and chaos. His sentences, carved to perfection, contain the tumult of languages. Like insects, in amber. Frozen, yet visible. Mute, yet eloquent. In existential terms, Madame Bovary dramatizes the crisis of human subjectivity in an environment where authenticity has been eroded by cliché. Emma's suicide is both physical and linguistic. She takes poison when words fail her. When no discourse, religious, romantic, or rational, can articulate her despair. The act is not a moral conclusion, but a silence that reveals the insufficiency of all available languages. Yet even in death, the dialogue continues. The community's gossip, the doctor's report, the pharmacist's self-congratulation, all rush in to reinterpret her act, replacing living experience with commentary. Death itself becomes another speech genre. Flaubert thus shows how even silence is captured by discourse. Unfinalizability persists beyond the grave. The novel's conclusion, with James receiving the Legion of Honor, seals the irony. Life goes on. Language triumphs over experience. What appears to be closure is in fact continuation. The endless chatter of history, speaking over the tomb of individuality. If we consider the chronotopic structure, the representation of time and space, we see that Flaubert's world is governed by the stagnation of provincial temporality. The rhythm of events is cyclical. Fairs, pregnancies, debts, seasons repeat with numbing regularity. Time, in Madame Bovary, lacks epic direction. It is the time of capitalist routine, of bureaucratic repetition and everyday banality. The spatial setting mirrors this temporality. Closed interiors, narrow streets, suffocating salons. The open road of adventure has vanished. Loneliness replaces journey. Yet this apparent immobility intensifies the inner dialogue of consciousness. Deprived of outward movement, language turns inward, proliferating in fantasy and memory. In this sense, the novel anticipates the psychological modernism of the 20th century. It demonstrates how the polyphonic potential of the novel migrates from external adventure to internal discourse, from the dialogues among knights and peasants to the dialogic multiplicity within a single self. The ethical dimension of this transformation is profound. Dostoevsky's world, which I have elsewhere described as a symposium of souls, offered redemption through dialogue. Each consciousness seeking response and forgiveness. Flaubert's world denies such reciprocity. His characters speak, but do not hear. They repeat, but do not renew. The tragedy of Madame Bovary is that the dialogic principle of humanity has collapsed under the weight of its own language. Yet, by representing that collapse in aesthetic form, Flaubert restores the very dialogue he portrays as lost. The reader's encounter with the novel reopens communication. We, living later, respond. where Emma's contemporaries could not. Thus, Flaubert's art is ethically alive. Even in depicting moral death, it turns silence into discourse, isolation into communion. From this perspective, Flaubert may be seen as both the heir and the critic of realism. His meticulous attention to detail, his scientific neutrality, are not ends in themselves, but instruments of dialogic estrangement. Where traditional realism sought the transparency of language, Flaubert insists on its opacity. The world does not speak in one idiom. It stutters, contradicts, and repeats. The novelist's task is not to unify, but to expose that multiplicity. This is why his sentences are so laboriously perfect. They must hold, within their crystalline surface, the echo of discordant voices. Every piece of description, be it a bouquet, a dress, or a field, becomes symbolic, not through hidden allegory, but through the tension of styles, of metaphors, worn and renewed. The precision of Flaubert's prose is the precision of polyphony, disciplined by syntax. In the genealogy of the modern novel, Madame Bovary stands at the juncture where the polyphonic carnival of earlier ages is translated into the interior speech of modernity, where the laughter of the marketplace becomes the irony of consciousness. After Flaubert, the novel can no longer present experience as direct. It must account for mediation, for the echo of existing words within new voices. Joyce, Proust, even postmodern metafiction, will extend this awareness. But the seed lies in Flaubert's recognition that every utterance already bears quotation marks. Emma's life unfolds between quotation marks. The narrator quotes her. Society quotes morality. And the reader perceives quotation upon quotation, until the original voice dissolves. Yet, in that dissolution, arises the freedom of art. The acknowledgement that truth emerges not from the purity of utterance, but from the dialogue among its impurities. To live authentically in Flaubert's world would mean to recover dialogic openness, to speak without already repeating. But the modern condition, he implies, renders such freedom nearly impossible. Nevertheless, his novel performs it. In the act of composition, Flaubert listens to all the voices of his century and lets them speak through him. He becomes what I call the orchestrator of heteroglossia, the one who neither exalts nor silences, but arranges. His irony is the artistic equivalent of the carnival master's laughter, encompassing, impartial, revelatory. In this laughter, we glimpse both condemnation and compassion. Condemnation of language that deceives. Compassion for the human beings trapped inside it. Hence, Madame Bovary endures, not as moral example or stylistic relic, but as foundational document of modern dialogism. It inaugurates the era in which art must dwell within contradiction, where truth is relational, where every word contains its negation. Flaubert's so-called impersonality is in fact a radical trust in the dialogue of voices. By refusing to speak above them, he lets the world reveal its polyphonic soul. If earlier literature sought unity of tone, Flaubert establishes polyphonic dissonance as aesthetic norm. His accomplishment lies in discovering that the novelist's true object is not event or character, but discourse itself, the living speech of civilization. Forever entangled, forever unfinalized. Thus, the silence that closes Madame Bovary is not the silence of death, but the pause before another response. The reader, closing the book, carries within him the whisper of those interwoven languages. The romantic sigh, the bureaucratic cliché, the scientific brag, the priestly platitude, all echoing within the inner ear of modern consciousness. The novel becomes an unfinished conversation between the 19th century and ourselves. In that sense, Flaubert achieves what every great dialogic artist seeks: to create a form that contains more life than he himself could answer. Madame Bovary speaks still, not because it resolves human contradiction, but because it expresses that contradiction in its purest linguistic form. It is both elegy and prophecy, the lament for a dead language, and the first utterance of a new one, the monologue that discovers within itself the seeds of eternal dialogue.